And when I had that crash, and, thing spun around, hit the wall, flips upside down, and I feel something else, and then something gets my attention. I look up and I'm seeing sparks, and damn, I'm upside down. And, can't breathe, can't get my breath. There's fluid running in. I'd already had a pit fire. So I was having to breathe shallow because I can't stop. It's going down a straightaway. It's not slowing down because there's no rubber on the ground. People have asked me the same questions for years. They want to know about the 4 Indianapolis 500 victories. They ask about qualifying laps, pole positions, close finishes, the crashes, the comebacks. Some people still bring up that accident at Santa Ana and wonder how I ever climbed back into a race car after something like that. I understand those questions. Those moments are part of my career, and they'll always be part of my story. But every once in a while, somebody asks something that makes me stop before I answer. Rick, who were the 5 greatest IndyCar drivers you ever raced against? Now, that's a harder question because greatness isn't always measured by championships. It isn't always measured by race wins either. I've raced against men who never had the biggest trophy collection, but somehow every time I saw their name on the timing sheet, I knew the day was going to be a little more difficult. Some could save a race when everyone else was burning through tires. Some never seemed to make a mistake when the pressure was highest. Others could read a 500-mile race almost like they already knew how the final 50 laps were going to unfold. Those are the drivers you never forget. They forced me to become more patient, more disciplined, sometimes even more humble. When I think back on my career, these aren't just the men I competed against. They're the ones who quietly shaped the driver I eventually became. So, if you'll indulge me for a little while, I'd like to tell you about 5 competitors who earned my respect every single time we shared a starting grid. I've got to begin with Gordon Johncock. The first time I raced against Gordon, it didn't take very long to understand why so many people around the paddock respected him. He wasn't the kind of driver who demanded attention. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. He simply went about his work, lap after. What made Gordon so tough was never raw speed alone. It was his understanding of long races. Anybody can drive fast for 10 laps. The truly great ones know how to drive 500 miles. Gordon always seemed to know exactly how much he could ask from the tires, the engine, and himself. While other drivers were thinking about the next corner, he was already thinking about the next fuel stop, the changing track conditions, and what the race might look like an hour later. That kind of thinking forced everyone around him to become smarter. I admired that. One race always comes back to me whenever people ask about Gordon. Indianapolis, 1982. To this day, people still talk about that finish, and I understand why. After 500 miles, Gordon and I came across the line separated by just 16 one-hundredths of a second at the time. It was the closest finish in Indianapolis 500 history. What most people remember is the final lap. What I remember is everything that happened before it. For hours we had been measuring each other. Nobody wanted to make the mistake that would decide the race too early. Every move had a purpose. Every lap mattered. When I finally crossed the finish line ahead of him, I knew I'd beaten one of the smartest competitors I'd ever face. There wasn't any feeling of relief because the race had been easy. There was satisfaction because I knew exactly who I'd just raced against. Gordon taught me that winning Indianapolis wasn't about finding one magical lap. It was about making hundreds of good decisions without letting your emotions take over. That lesson stayed with me long after that afternoon. Even today, when I think about what made a truly complete IndyCar driver, Gordon Johncock is one of the very first names that comes to mind. Not because he was flashy, not because he chased headlines, but because every time he rolled onto the grid, you knew you were going to have to earn absolutely everything. Then there was Unser. There are drivers who beat you with aggression. There are drivers who beat you with speed. And then there are drivers like Al. He made racing look almost effortless. That was probably the most dangerous thing about him. The first few laps never told you much. You could be running ahead of him, feel completely comfortable, and think you had the race under control. Then, somewhere around halfway, you'd look at the scoring pylon, and there he was. Still right there. Still saving his equipment. Still waiting. What made Al so difficult was never one spectacular skill. It was how complete he was. He understood traffic. He understood fuel mileage. He knew when to push and, more importantly, when not to. There were very few wasted movements in the way he drove. Everything had a purpose. That kind of discipline is harder to master than people realize. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, we found ourselves fighting for many of the same victories. Whether it was Indianapolis or the kart championship, you always had to assume Al would be there at the end. You couldn't count him out simply because someone else looked faster early in the afternoon. One season that always stands out to me is 1978. That year showed just how remarkably consistent he could be. He captured the USAC National Championship by putting together race after race with very few mistakes. Watching someone perform at that level teaches you an important lesson. Championships aren't usually won because of one incredible weekend. They're won because you refuse to have bad weekends. I also respected the way Al carried himself around the garage. He never seemed interested in creating drama. He let the stopwatch do the talking. As competitors, we certainly wanted to beat each other, but there was always mutual respect because we both understood what this sport demanded. You don't survive at the front of IndyCar for years without earning that respect. Looking back now, I think Al reminded all of us that patience isn't passive. Patience is a weapon. It's knowing exactly when to stay calm while everyone else is trying to force the race to come to them. I tried to learn from that, not by copying his style. Nobody could. But by understanding why it worked. When people ask me about the greatest drivers I ever raced against, Al Unser belongs in that conversation every single time. He didn't need to overwhelm you with dramatic moves. He simply kept making the right decisions, lap after lap, race after race, and before you knew it, he'd put himself in position to win again. That's the kind of greatness that never fades with time. Now this one was completely different. Bobby Unser never tried to hide who he was. He was confident, sometimes brutally confident. He loved competition, and he wasn't afraid to let everyone know it. When I first started racing against Bobby, I understood very quickly that you couldn't be intimidated by his reputation. If you were, he'd already gained an advantage before the green flag even dropped. What made Bobby so difficult was never just his speed. It was the pressure he created. He had an incredible feel for high-speed oval racing, especially at Indianapolis. He understood how the track changed throughout the day. He knew where grip would appear. He knew how traffic would affect the air around the car. And he trusted those instincts completely. There weren't many drivers who believed in themselves as much as Bobby did. That confidence spread through the entire team. When they arrived at the speedway, they expected to win. As competitors, you could feel that during the late 1970s, Bobby was still one of the benchmarks at Indianapolis. He had already won the race multiple times and had spent years proving he belonged among the very best. For younger drivers like me, racing against someone with that kind of experience meant every lap became an education. You couldn't simply outrun him. You had to outthink him, and that wasn't easy. One moment that always stands out is the 1981 Indianapolis 500. Bobby crossed the finish line first that afternoon, but the race became one of the most controversial in Indy history because of the pit lane passing penalty. After weeks of appeals, he was eventually reinstated as the winner. Whether people agreed with the decision or not, it reminded everyone just how fiercely he competed. He fought for every position. He fought for every victory. And he never stopped believing he deserved to win. I respected that determination. Not because I wanted to race exactly the way Bobby did. We were different drivers with different personalities. But because he never backed away from the responsibility that comes with leading a team and carrying expectations. He accepted pressure. Sometimes he even seemed to enjoy it. Looking back now, Bobby taught me that experience can become one of the greatest weapons a driver has. As the years pass, you begin to recognize situations before they happen. You stay calmer. You waste less energy. You trust what you've already learned. That's exactly what Bobby did. Every time I saw his car on the entry list, I knew the day wasn't going to be easy. You don't earn that kind of reputation by accident. You earn it through years of winning, adapting, and refusing to let anyone take control of a race without making them fight for it first. A few years later, another challenge arrived. Danny Sullivan was different from the drivers I'd grown up racing. He brought a different kind of energy. He was aggressive, fearless, and he had the confidence to attack whenever he saw even the smallest opportunity. When Danny joined Team Penske, things became even more interesting. Racing against someone from another team is one thing. Racing against your own teammate is something else entirely. There's nowhere to hide. You're driving the same equipment, working with many of the same engineers, looking at the same data after every session. If your teammate finds another tenth of a second, everyone in the garage knows exactly where you lost it. What made Danny so difficult was his qualifying speed. He could produce extraordinary laps when everything depended on a single run. Some drivers gradually built confidence throughout a weekend. Danny seemed to find another gear the moment the pressure reached its highest point. That isn't something you can teach. It's instinct. It's belief. And it's incredibly difficult to race against. The moment everyone remembers, of course, is the 1985 Indianapolis 500, his famous spin and win. Most people remember the dramatic spin while battling Mario Andretti. What impressed me was everything that came afterward. A lot of drivers would have panicked. Some would have settled for bringing the car home. Danny didn't. He gathered the car back under control, stayed in the race, and eventually fought all the way back to win. You don't accomplish something like that without remarkable composure. That race became part of Indianapolis history for good reason. As teammates, we naturally pushed each other every weekend. There was respect between us, but there was also competition. Neither of us wanted to be the second fastest Penske driver. That kind of environment raises everyone's standard. It forces you to prepare better, to study harder, to pay attention to details that might otherwise seem insignificant. Looking back now, I'm grateful for that. Danny reminded me that talent alone isn't enough at this level. You also need resilience. Things will go wrong. A pit stop, a yellow flag, a handling change, a mistake that wasn't even your fault. The drivers who last are the ones who recover faster than everyone else. That's exactly what Danny did throughout his career. When people talk about him, they often begin with one unforgettable race. I understand why, but I remember something bigger. I remember a competitor who never stopped believing he could fight his way back, no matter what had happened a few laps earlier. That's a quality every race driver admires. And it's one of the reasons I'll always have enormous respect for Danny Sullivan. And finally, I have to mention Michael Andretti. By the time Michael arrived, you could already feel that IndyCar was entering a new era. The cars were evolving. The competition was getting deeper. A younger generation was beginning to challenge everything the veterans had built. Michael became one of the faces of that change. The first thing that stood out about him was his commitment. He never looked like someone who was simply trying to have a good weekend. He came to win every single time. What made Michael so difficult was his pace over an entire race weekend. Yes, he was incredibly fast over one lap. But what separated him from so many others was how quickly he could understand a car. If the balance wasn't right on Friday, he and his team usually found the answer before Sunday. That ability to adapt kept him competitive almost everywhere we raced. Road courses, street circuits, super speedways, he always found a way to be in the conversation. As our careers overlapped during the late 1980s and early 1990s, I could see just how much confidence he carried into every event. He wasn't intimidated by anyone's resume. It didn't matter how many Indianapolis victories another driver had. Once the helmet went on, everyone started equal in his mind. That's a quality every champion needs. One season that perfectly demonstrated his talent was 1991. Michael won 8 kart races that year and earned the series championship. Week after week, he showed remarkable consistency while still driving with the aggression that had become his trademark. Watching that season unfold, it was obvious that the future of IndyCar had arrived. Even though I was reaching the later years of my own career, competing against drivers like Michael kept me motivated. You never want the next generation to believe you've become comfortable. You want to prove that experience still matters. At the same time, you also have to respect what the younger drivers bring to the sport. Michael reminded all of us that racing never stands still. Every generation arrives with new ideas, new confidence, new expectations. If you refuse to evolve, they'll pass you sooner or later. That's true in racing. And it's true in life. Looking back now, I don't think of Michael simply as one of the fastest drivers I raced against. I remember him as the bridge between two eras of American open-wheel racing. He represented where the sport was going, while many of us were still writing the final chapters of our own careers. That's never an easy role to carry. He handled it remarkably well, and every time we shared a starting grid, he gave me one more reason to keep finding a little more speed, a little more focus, and a little more determination inside myself. When I look back on all those years, I don't really think about statistics first. I don't think about how many poles I won or how many times I stood in victory lane. Those things mattered then. They still mean a lot to me today. But time has a way of changing what you value. The trophies are wonderful. The photographs bring back memories. The records will always belong to history. What stays with me even more are the people, the men who climbed into cars knowing exactly how much was at stake, the men who understood that every lap at over 200 miles an hour demanded complete trust in yourself, your team, and everyone sharing the racetrack with you. Gordon Johncock taught me patience. Al Unser showed me that consistency could be just as powerful as speed. Bobby Unser proved that confidence and experience could change the entire atmosphere of a race weekend. Danny Sullivan reminded me that resilience often matters more than perfection. And Michael Andretti showed me that every generation brings someone capable of raising the standard all over again. I never became the driver I was by racing against easy competition. I became better because those men refused to make anything easy. That's something I'll always be grateful for. The engines eventually fall silent. The crowds head home. The checkered flags become memories. But the respect you earn from the people who shared those moments with you, that stays with you for the rest of your life.